Can you speak much about the spread betting thing?
Yeah, I can speak about that. It's fine. I don't work for Sky anymore, so that matter. That was Gordon Watson's fault. That was Flash's fault. I'd never really heard of spread betting, to be honest. Yeah, I had a bet back in the day. I mean, we were allowed to back in the day. I know. I can't remember when it changed, but I used to go. There used to be a bookies about 300 yards from the Dell, and I used to go in there before the game on a Saturday and back myself to score the first goal. I mean, it was quite good odds actually at the time. But nobody batted an eyelid. Do you know what I mean? As long as you weren't betting on your team to lose, no one batted an eyelid if you were backing yourself to score or back your team to win. So anyway, I used to do that. And then Flash can't. He said, you had spread betting? I went, no, I haven't got a clue. He went, well, you can bet on anything now. He said, you can bet on corners, when the first free kick's going to be, when the first throw-in's going to be. I was like, all right. And he went, well, he said, my mates have got spread betting accounts. He said, we're on telly against Wimbledon next week. He said, and they can bet on the first throw-in in a game. He said, and if we get a throw-in really early, they'll make loads of money from it. He said, and they'll probably drop you a few quid. So I was like, how does that work? He went, well, we just have to get the kick-off. He said, and we get the kick-off, and from kick-off, you just boot the ball out of play. So well, that sounds pretty simple. He went, it is simple. He said, but the bookies are stupid. What are they doing that for? So anyway, all we had to do was obviously make sure we had kick-off. So we get to Sellers Park where Wimbledon were playing. I think Vinnie Jones was the captain. And so I've gone to Vinnie before the game. I've gone, Vinnie, what way do you like to kick in the second half? And he went, he said, we like to kick towards our fan at that end. And I went, all right. I said, you can kick that way in the second half if you let us have kick-off in the first half. And he went, yeah, all right. So that was it. Like, before we'd even flipped the coin, I knew we was having the kick-off. So anyway.
It's working out quite well then, isn't it?
I know, yeah. So we get the kick-off. Gordon rolls the ball back to me, and now it's live on telly, so I don't want to overhit this ball. Because it's too obvious, and I think I'm quite a good player. I can just clip this over Neil Shipley's head, make it look realistic. So the ball comes to me, and just as I'm about to strike it just takes a little bobble, right? And at that point, my heart sank because right from the moment I hit it, I thought, that ain't enough.
Not enough club.
That ain't enough club. I've duffed that a little bit. And this is never reaching the touchline. So it goes straight at Ships. And Ships is obviously, what can he do? Hits Ships, goes back into play. And honestly, for the next 60 seconds, you see me and Gordon Watson running around like blue-ass flies trying to get the ball fucking boot out of play. Because otherwise they're losing a fortune if this carries on.
It's just got to be in the first minute.
So it had to be before 60 seconds for them to make money. And the more before it was 60 seconds, the more money they make.
Right.
But if it goes after 75 seconds, every second after 75 seconds, they start losing money. So that can add up quite quick. And we managed to get the ball out, I think, between 60 and 75 seconds, which was that dead period where nobody won and nobody lost. So it was a lesson well learnt, and I did not do that again.
I can imagine Flash wanted to do it again, though.
He probably did, but I wasn't up for that after that experience. That was not a nice experience. And then I probably was a bit naive because I told that story in my book. I wrote a book and put the story in there as a warning, really, to other players to go, don't be such a twat like I was, and don't do stupid things like this. And with that, somebody at TalkSport got hold of it. I think it was the little short fella, Mike Parry. He decided that he was going to do an entire afternoon's programme on that story, and that I should be banned from all football and ostracised from the game because I told this story in my book. When basically I was telling it as a lesson for people to go, don't be an idiot. But he decided that this was a newsworthy story and he was going to make an entire radio show out of it, and I had to have a couple of weeks off of Sky while it all died down a little bit.
Calm down.
Yeah, calm down. So yeah, that was fun.
Now you're not under NDA to talk about why you were let go from Sky. What really happened?
Oh no, I mean that's been a few years. I was actually able to. I was allowed to say what happened. I just wasn't allowed to criticise them. So I could say what happened. So I wasn't allowed to have an opinion on it. That's what the NDA was. Yeah.
What we just said about free speech.
I know.
Oh, you're allowed to talk about it, but
but
You
you're
can't
not
say
allowed to
anything.
have an opinion on it. You can say what happened, but you're not allowed to. I wasn't allowed to criticise.
Okay, so tell us what happened and then give us your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I got sacked for. I know we spoke about this last time when I was on. That I was probably made myself a little bit unpopular with the bosses by. After the first programme, I refused to wear the Black Lives Matter badge anymore. So that was the first thing. I was kind of having a go at not having a go. I was pointing out the fact that teams in the relegation zone around the time they were trying to start the Premier League back up again in 2020 after the shutdown. I'd kind of made a few comments on social media about the teams in the relegation zones were the only ones that were kind of highlighting the fact that they were having COVID cases and that they didn't really want the season to start up again because they wanted the money from the TV deal the following season, so they didn't want to get relegated and lose all that money. So that got me a complaint from one of the CEOs at one of the Premier League football clubs who rang into Sky and complained about me. So I had the phone call from that. And basically, it was just that everything that I was putting on social media was kind of going against not only the government narrative, but the mainstream media were all in on it. And so, obviously, that included my employers, which was Sky News. But of course, I was in the Sky Sports department, so I viewed that as a completely separate entity. So I didn't, if I'm working for Sky Sports, I thought I'm going to criticise Sky News because I don't think they're doing things properly.
Do you think it had anything to do with your age and your ethnicity? Because Mark did. Mark was down here, Mark Lawrenson, not long ago, and he thought so.
I certainly think there was, since Comcast took over, there was definitely the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff was coming into the programs, and having 5 middle-aged white men on their most popular program on a Saturday afternoon probably wasn't a good look for them. I don't think they'd ever admit that because obviously that would leave them open to to perhaps being sued. But I mean, they can admit it all they want. I'm not going to sue them. I'm not bitter. I'm not vindictive. I don't think going to sue people for that kind of thing is the right thing to do. I've just moved on with my life, found other work, crack on with it.
And what do you think about the diversity, equity, and inclusion in football? And do you think that's right to have all the commentators in this varied backgrounds?
Are you talking about the women football commentators specifically? Yeah. I've always held the opinion that if you're going to have a co-commentator on a football match, I think it should be somebody that's been in that arena. So if you're got a women's football match on the television, I think you should have a women's football player giving comments, because a man in that situation wouldn't have been in that situation on a field of play with a bunch of women. And so from that point of view, I think for men's football, I think the same thing should happen. I don't find that a particularly controversial opinion. But apparently, if you have those views, you get labelled as misogynistic, and you're a really bad person because you don't think a woman should be commentating on a men's football match.
But she's never played a men's football match.
That's exactly my point, and that's I think is the view of the majority of football fans. If you ask me, I've even had loads of women coming up to me and saying to me, "My God, I can't listen to those football matches when there's women commentators." And this is women coming up to me and telling me this, and I'm like, yeah, it does seem a bit odd. Surely they should stick to the women's game and the men should do the men's game. It's not rocket science. But no, we want to blur the lines between everything.
So what's your opinion about getting fired by Sky? And your opinion about Sky?
I don't think they're a particularly good company to work for. I'm still in contact with people who still do work there, who tell me how it's changed, not for the better, in the last few years. What's my opinion of them? Yeah, not a great company to work for. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I've moved on with my life. I had 15 great years working there. Loved it. It was a fantastic part of my life, but things change and you move on.
When Glenn Hoddle, obviously you had your kind of where you turned him down, maybe moving to him, and then he comes to Southampton
What was the relationship like there? Because
Kind of mixed feelings really when he came into Southampton, because obviously he'd left me out of the '98 World Cup squad as England manager, and I was very, very disappointed at that. And then a year later, I think it was, or a few months later, he's turning up at Southampton as manager, and it was kind of mixed feelings because he was my hero as a kid. I loved him as a footballer, and I just hoped that kind of we'd be able to get on, and it never really materialised. He kind of almost went out of his way to kind of pick on me in training and stuff. When I'd make a mistake, he'd be jumping down my throat. Other players would make mistakes, he wouldn't say anything. And I felt like it was a little bit unfair. And if there's one thing that really annoys me in this life, it's unfairness. And so he was kind of the only manager who I really snapped at during my career. I just remember once in a training session, I'd tried to pick someone out with a pass. It didn't go the way it was planned, and he just jumped straight down my throat, and I just felt myself so frustrated. Not that frustrated that I hadn't passed it properly, but also that he's just on my case.
Yeah,
like he's not on anybody else's case. And I just turned around and I just, why don't you just off? and it was the first time I'd ever sworn at my manager, and I was like 30 years of age at this point, 31, something like that. And I'd never sworn at my manager. I was always very respectful. Even when they dropped me, I never swore at them. I never kind of demanded to be put back in the team. I'd just get on with it, and I just lost it at that point. People thought I was lazy. I wasn't lazy. I was economical.
yeah.
This guy turned up, a guy called Ali Deer, turned up on the recommendation that he was from George Ware, apparently. George Ware's cousin, and George had said, this guy is a pretty good footballer, give him a try. So Graham Souness was manager at the time. And so he came down on the Friday morning and he trained with us and he played in the five-a-side. And to be honest, it didn't look very good. And we thought, well, that's fair enough. People, trialists come and go, and I just thought this was going to be the same thing. This guy, will never see him again. He wasn't particularly good. We turn up for the game the next day. We're playing against Leeds, and he's on the subs bench. He's named on the bench, and that's like, well, that's a bit strange. Didn't look that good yesterday. Well, after about 20 minutes, I get a calf strain, and it's actually me that comes off so that Ali Dia can go on, and it was unbelievable. He ran around the pitch like Bambi on ice. It was very, very embarrassing to watch. And just after half-time, Graham Souness actually had to take him off again because he was that bad. I have no idea if he was George Ware's cousin or not. I don't think he was. Very bizarre situation. He was just chuffed to have got out on the pitch and played. I think it was a great wind-up from someone who just came up with this idea. And if it had turned up when you'd been framed, I would have been, I wouldn't have been surprised. It was crazy. He turned up the next morning for treatment on an injury. The physio was telling me. And so the Sunday morning he turns up, he has a bit of treatment, he leaves, and then we never see him again. He never came back. He just left. Nobody knows where he went. Never to be seen since. It was a very odd...
What's your beef with Jamie Carragher?
What's my beef with him?
You don't like him, do you?
I didn't dislike him, but he took exception to me talking about him spitting at the young girl out of his car window, and so I didn't have a problem with him until he rang me up. I think it was probably after we did our podcast, actually, and I was walking through. I was in London. I was with my family in London, and my wife was in one of the shops, and I was just stood outside, and a phone call went. It was a number I didn't recognise, so I picked it up, and he went, "Tess, it's Cara." I went, "Oh, all right, you all right, mate?" "No, I'm not." And for the next 10 minutes, he literally was screaming and abusing me down the phone, telling me that how out of order I was, that I should bring up the fact that he spat at this young girl out the back of his car. And I was quite calm about it all. I was just having a little chat, and he was shouting on the other end, and my wife came out the shop, and we're walking down the street, and I'm continuing this conversation. I've literally got the phone like that. And he's shouting at me. I'm keeping very calm. I don't get upset about all this stuff. I let him rant. You know, when he was threatening me stuff like, I'm going to be trolling you on social media, you know, anything you tweet, I'm going to be all over it. Oh, yeah. It was, and so up until that point, I didn't have a problem with him. You know, all I used was an example of, you know, what had happened at Sky that might have, you know, not enhanced their reputation, you know, when they sacked me. And so yeah, after that phone call, I was like, yeah, you're not a very nice bloke, mate. Take responsibility for your own actions. You were the one that actually spat at the young girl out your car. That's not on me. You need to take responsibility for that. You need to own it. If someone talks about it, that's tough, mate, because you did it and you have to own it.
Do you think he should have been sacked for that?
I mean, I was surprised that he wasn't. I was surprised. But nothing surprises me.
How did you get on with Carlton?
Eventually we got on all right. The first few months were a bit interesting. It's fair to say me and Carlton didn't see eye to eye when he first arrived.
Initially.
Yeah, and I mean, it was probably my fault to a certain extent because I think on one of his very first days in training, I was on the same side as him in a five-a-side match. And I wasn't always the best trainer in the world, and obviously in this five-a-side game, I'd given the ball away quite cheaply, and then hadn't bothered to track back and try and win it back. So I just stood up the top of the pitch, and Carlton runs back and tackles this geezer, and then stands up and he starts digging me out in training for not running back. And I just looked at him and I went, Carlton, you haven't been here very long, have you? I said, what happens here is the players that can play, they play, and your job is to go and fetch the ball and give it to me.
I can imagine that like a dagger in his heart.
That went down like a lead balloon. So for about the next 2 months, he barely spoke to me. And then eventually we kind of found a bit of common ground. I started going out a bit in Southampton. He liked to drink. And I'll tell you what it was, though. I've never known anybody in my life who could drink the way that Carlton Palmer drank, have as little sleep as he had, still turn up to training the next morning and be the first in the running. It was unbelievable.
It's an art, isn't it?
It is an unbelievable.
Underrated.
I mean, you could do like a 12-hour session on the beer, have like 2 hours sleep, rock up for training. I've had like 11 hours sleep, and he leaves me for dead. How does he do that? He's some kind of freak of nature, is what he was. And I've got to tell you, for the first 6 to 9 months at Southampton, I reckon, I mean, I played against Carlton quite a lot, but I reckon that first 6 or 9 months at Southampton was probably about the best I saw him play in his career. It was brilliant for us the first 6 or 9 months. Really was. It was good, you know. And then, kind of, I don't know if the drink caught up with him, the partying caught up with him a little bit. He kind of went off the ball, and I don't know what it was, but he kind of lost what he had for that first 6 or 9 months, and he kind of went off the ball, and that's actually when we started getting on a bit better. we were both going out.
You weren't as far behind him the next day.
Yeah, it was interesting. I loved it. I remember having we were doing this thing on the bus as you did back in the day, like we were on a long coach journey to somewhere. Everywhere's a long coach journey from Southampton, and we were on our way up north, and we're just having a chat on the bus, and it's one of those conversations where you go, "Go on, then. So if you won £1 million tomorrow, what would you do with it?" So we're having this conversation, and we're going, buy a nice house, and you know what's coming, don't you?
I've got a feeling.
So we're all going, yeah, cars, holidays, and it gets round to Carlton. Carlton, what would you do? He went, I'd put it with the other three. And I was like, you twat.
I like it. Though.
That's exactly what I thought would come in. I didn't give him 3 or 2. But that's just how he is. I think if you...
Oh, yeah, it's great. We get on fine now, you know. But we did have a little period because I used to do this thing in my after dinner speech where I mean it's not nice, but it was tongue in cheek, right? And I think Carlton kind of took it a bit personally when he really shouldn't have done. I was only just pissing about. But in my after dinner speech, when I talk about England, and I'll go and I say something like Matt Le Tissier, what was that? Matt Le Tissier got eight caps for England. Carlton Palmer, 18 caps. And we wonder why we haven't won anything since 1966. Right? I did that. It was just a mess about, throw about line, just messing about. And somebody, obviously, who knew Carlton was at one of my speeches, he rings up Carlton and goes, you know what Matt Le Tissier said about you? And Carlton, was like, being Carlton, what bastard was he? So he then goes on Soccer AM, absolutely slaughters me on Soccer AM, does a book, slaughters me in his book. And just going, my career was better than Matt Le Tissier's. What did he ever achieve? He underachieved. And I was like, fuck, Carl, I was only joking. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to go slaughtering me on telly and in your book. And then he obviously had his problem with his ticker a few years back, and I just messaged him, and we started talking again. And he's good as gold now.